Models. 249. https://www.nexgo.io/resources/news/deepseek-v4-release-specs-2026. DeepSeek just released V4, the largest open-weight model ever shipped. 1 trillion parameters, Apache 2.0 license, and it costs roughly 500 times less to run than Claude Opus. The architecture is mixture of experts. Despite the trillion-parameter headline, the model only activates around 37 billion parameters per token during inference. Efficiency over brute force. The result: inference at about $280 per billion tokens, compared to 15,000 for Claude Opus 4.6. The performance numbers are real. V4 scored 81% on SWE Bench Verified, competitive with US frontier models. It has a 1 million token context window with something DeepSeek calls engram memory. Text, image, and video are handled natively, built into pre-training, not bolted on. Here's the geopolitical angle. V4 is optimized to run on Huawei Ascend and Cambricon chips, Chinese silicon. US export controls were supposed to slow China's AI development by cutting off NVIDIA access. V4 is a direct data point that the strategy has limits. Estimated training cost, $5.2 million. That's not a typo. US frontier models cost hundreds of millions. DeepSeek is either doing something dramatically different, or dramatically better, or both. Apache 2.0 means anyone can download, modify, and deploy this model commercially. No restrictions. The open-source AI world just got its most powerful entry yet. Watch what happens when developers around the world start building on a trillion-parameter model they can run themselves. Morning. Models. 222. https://www.reddit.com/r/localllama/comments/1SGL3QZ/gemma_4_on_llama_CPP_should_be_stable_now. Gemma 4 is now stable on llama.cpp. Pull request 21534 merged. All known issues resolved. If you've been waiting to run Google's latest open model locally, that wait is over. This matters because llama.cpp is the most widely used local inference engine. It's what powers most consumer-grade AI setups, on laptops, on Mac hardware, on machines that can't afford a cloud API bill. When a model becomes stable on llama.cpp, it becomes accessible to an enormous portion of the open-source AI community. And the performance claims are getting interesting. A separate thread on r/localllama, 722 upvotes, so the community is paying attention, argues that Gemma 4's 31 billion parameter model, running at a compressed IQ3_XXS quantization, outperforms Anthropic's Opus 4.6 on creative tasks. That claim should be treated carefully. Benchmark comparisons between quantized open models and frontier commercial models are notoriously task-specific and cherry-pickable. Creative tasks is a wide category, but the direction of the claim is consistent with a broader trend. Open models are closing the gap with commercial offerings faster than most labs predicted. A year ago, running a model competitive with a frontier system on consumer hardware was a weekend project for researchers. Now it's a Reddit post with instructions. The local AI moment is here. Gemma 4 just made it more accessible. Morning. Business. 237. https://sherwood.news/markets/anthropic-revenue-30-billion-Google-Broadcom- partnership. Anthropic just crossed $30 billion in annualized revenue, surpassing OpenAI for the first time. That's triple the $9 billion run rate it posted at the end of 2025, and it happened in months, not years. Let's put some numbers on this. Anthropic now has more than 1,000 enterprise customers spending at least $1 million a year. 2 months ago, that number was 500. Claude Code alone, the developer tool, crossed $1 billion in revenue on its own. And the infrastructure is matching the ambition. Anthropic just finalized an expanded compute deal with Google and Broadcom that hands them 3.5 gigawatts of TPU capacity. That's not a modest server room. That's the kind of compute footprint you build when you expect to run the world's most used AI systems. To be clear, we're talking annualized run rate, not booked revenue. This is the projection based on current monthly figures, extrapolated out. Anthropic hasn't reported GAAP numbers. But even with that caveat, a 3x jump in months is a signal, not a rounding error. For years, Anthropic played the role of the thoughtful safety lab with a product on the side. That framing is gone. They are now the highest revenue AI lab on the planet, ahead of OpenAI, and they have the compute deals to match. Watch for Anthropic's next fundraising round. That $60 billion valuation may already be conservative. Morning. Business. 232. https://www.cnbc.com/2026/044/09/meta-commits-to-21 billion with -CoreWeave-.html. Meta has committed an additional $21 billion to CoreWeave. One company, one commitment, $21 billion. To put that in context, CoreWeave went public earlier this year as an AI-focused GPU cloud provider. It's not a hyperscaler. It's not AWS or Azure. It's a relatively new player that built its business around renting high-end compute to AI companies. And Meta just handed it one of the largest single AI infrastructure commitments ever recorded. This is the number that defines what's happening in AI right now. The compute costs aren't coming down, they're going up. The efficiency gains from better models aren't translating into smaller infrastructure bets. If anything, every efficiency improvement seems to unlock new appetite for more scale. What this tells you is that Meta isn't just building AI features. It's building AI infrastructure as a strategic asset. They're locking in capacity at a scale that locks others out. CoreWeave's post-IPO story just got a lot more interesting too. One customer commitment of this size changes the company's entire risk profile, for better and for worse. Watch how the other hyperscalers respond. When Meta spends $21 billion with a competitor to AWS, that's not just a vendor relationship. It's a signal about where AI infrastructure power is concentrating. Morning. DevTools. 229. https://github.com/anthropics/claude-code/issues/46829. Around March 6th, Anthropic changed a fundamental parameter for developers building on its API. Prompt caching, the feature that stores computed context between requests so you're not reprocessing the same large inputs over and over, had a 1-hour time-to-live window. After March 6th, it was 5 minutes. A 12 times reduction. No announcement. No documentation update. No changelog entry. Developers figured it out the hard way. Unexpectedly large API bills and degraded application performance. A developer eventually traced the change through session data forensics, SONA logs showing the precise date when 5-minute cache tokens began appearing and then outnumbered the 1-hour ones. Reported cost increases range from 20 to 32% for affected applications. A GitHub issue and significant hacker news attention followed. A few things worth noting. Anthropic has not confirmed whether this change was deliberate or a regression. Silent change is the accurate description. That's what the evidence supports. Whether it was intentional cost management or an infrastructure mistake remains unconfirmed. Don't call it either without that confirmation. What is clear is the broader principle at stake. Developers built applications and cost models around a stated cache window. That window changed without notice. As developers build more complex, economically sensitive applications on AI APIs, this is the kind of platform reliability that distinguishes trustworthy infrastructure from a service you manage around. Morning. DevTools. 218. https://huggingface.co/spaces/huggingfacetb/trl-distillation-trainer. Hugging Face has released a new distillation trainer in its TRL library, and the headline number is striking: 40 times faster distillation for models with 100 billion parameters or more. Quick explainer for the non-ML engineers in the room. Distillation is the process of taking a large, expensive model, a so-called teacher model, and compressing its capabilities into a smaller, cheaper model that can actually be deployed at scale. It's how frontier model capabilities eventually become accessible to teams that can't afford to run frontier model infrastructure. The faster distillation is, the faster that knowledge transfer happens. A 40x speedup on 100 billion plus parameter models is a meaningful compression of the timeline between frontier capability exists and smaller teams can build with it. Hugging Face shipped this as a live interactive space, so developers can test it directly without a lengthy setup process. One platform creates friction for developers without explanation. Another removes friction deliberately and publicly. The contrast is instructive. Expect distillation to become a faster, more crowded space throughout 2026 as open-weight communities use tools like this to compress the gap between the largest proprietary models and what's deployable on real infrastructure. Morning. Culture. 237. https://tanyavarmata.sh/2026/04/10/closing -the frontier, HTML. An essay called The Closing of the Frontier has been circulating heavily in developer communities this past week. The author, Tanya Varma, an independent essayist with no institutional affiliation, pulls from Frederick Jackson Turner's 1893 thesis on the American frontier to argue that AI access is replicating a feudal structure. Turner argued that free Western land shaped American democracy, and that the closure of that frontier in 1890 ended a formative era. Varma maps that frame onto frontier AI models. The powerful models exist, but access is controlled through corporate gatekeeping, enterprise partnerships, vetted relationships, usage tiers. The people who shaped early open web culture are now facing something structurally different, a frontier that exists, but that you need a relationship to enter. The sharpest line in the piece is about accountability. AI companies, Varma writes, have become simultaneously the manufacturer, the regulator, and the appeals court. If a developer or researcher loses access to a frontier model, there is no independent process to challenge that decision. That's not a political argument. It's a structural observation about how power is organized in this ecosystem. This week's edition opens with OpenAI lobbying to limit legal liability and closes with an essay about accountability gaps in AI access. That's not coincidence. It's the same question from different angles. Who is responsible when something goes wrong? And who decides who gets in? Morning. Culture. 228. https://www.sciencedaily.com/releases/2026/04050003952.htm. Here's a number worth sitting with. AI now consumes more than 10% of U.S. electricity. That's not a projection. It's where we are. And it's accelerating. Researchers at Tufts University think they have part of the answer, and the numbers they're publishing are striking. Their neurosymbolic approach, which combines traditional neural networks with rule-based symbolic reasoning, uses just 1% of the energy required for standard model training and 5% during operation. On the Tower of Hanoi benchmark, a standard test of structured reasoning, their system achieved 95% success. Standard vision language action models managed 34%. Training time dropped from 36 plus hours to 34 minutes. To be clear, this is academic research, not a product. It hasn't been validated at production scale, and the Tower of Hanoi is a controlled benchmark, not a real-world deployment. But when a peer-reviewed team at a credible institution claims 100x energy efficiency with better performance, it earns a serious look, especially at a moment when the AI industry's power appetite is becoming a political and infrastructure problem. The research is headed to ICRA 2026 in Vienna in May, the International Conference on Robotics and Automation. That's a rigorous peer venue. Watch for industry reaction after the Vienna presentation. If the results hold under scrutiny, this is the kind of paper that reshapes roadmaps. Morning. Wildcard. 196. https://news.ycombinator.com/item?ID =$477-38883. Over the weekend, developers across Spain opened their terminals, ran Docker pull, and got nothing. Not a slow pull. Not an authentication error. Nothing. CI/CD pipelines stalled. Deployments failed. Development environments couldn't spin up. It became a top story on Hacker News. The cause: La Liga, Spain's professional football league, had submitted IP addresses to Cloudflare for blocking, part of its ongoing campaign against illegal streaming of matches. One of those blocked IPs happened to be shared infrastructure serving Docker Hub. Collateral damage. This is not a one-off. La Liga blocks roughly 3,000 IP addresses almost every weekend during live matches. The mechanism is real-time and legally sanctioned under Spanish courts. Because modern hosting infrastructure uses shared IPs, a block aimed at a piracy stream can and does take down whatever else shares that address. Banking apps, government portals, and apparently your container registry. Matthew Prince, Cloudflare CEO, previously warned that this indiscriminate IP blocking approach was dangerous enough to, quote, claim lives, referencing scenarios where hospital or emergency infrastructure could be caught in the crossfire. This week at Claim Docker Poll. The infrastructure we build on is only as reliable as the policy decisions made around it, and those decisions are not always made by people who know what a container is. Morning. Wildcard. 227. https://www.youtube.com/watch?v =FSPIG for Kui. Morning in Fiji arrives with the kind of urgency only a hidden waterfall can inspire. You are awake while the island is still thinking, the lights soft, everything draped in that particular green that only happens in places where it rains regularly and nobody bothers to clear the paths. The water villa sits over turquoise, so bright it seems artificial, but the villas here are built to make you forget that nothing about this is accidental. You have already checked the coffee machine. It works. You have already opened the plunge pool control panel and watched the jets engage like someone was waiting for permission. But today you are not staying in the villa. You are climbing. There is a pathway that doesn't appear on most maps, the kind that locals mention in passing while wondering why you would leave your overwater bedroom. It winds through vegetation that has not decided what it wants to be yet. Part jungle, part resort landscaping, caught in between. The waterfall at the end doesn't know either. It is powerful and modest at the same time. The kind of discovery that makes your lungs remind you they have been carrying you uphill without complaint. You stand there breathing, dripping, thinking about how the South Pacific keeps things complicated even when it looks like it's trying to be simple.
Morning. Travel. 189. Travel segment. Kyoto at 5 in the morning belongs to the city, not to tourists. The streets are still dark, but not silent. A temple bell somewhere in the distance. A cyclist moving through an alley without urgency. A shopkeeper pulling a metal grate with the particular practice sound of someone who has done this 10,000 times. You are walking the philosopher's path before anyone else arrives. The canal runs alongside you, still and dark, cherry trees arching overhead in a canopy that doesn't care whether it is appreciated. This is not performance. This is just what Kyoto does in April. The first temple gate you reach is unlocked. Not advertised. Not open to tour groups. Just unlocked, with moss-covered stone steps leading up into a courtyard where a single lantern is still burning from the night before. You stop because stopping seems required. The kind of place that makes you conscious of your own breathing. By the time the light begins to find the rooftops, the path starts to fill. Other walkers. A few runners. The canal catches the sky and goes gold for about 4 minutes before the angle changes. Japan keeps its best hours early. You have to want them.